The axe came down. It split the pine round clean, two halves toppling into the snow, and Wade reached for the next without looking. Set the log, swing, split, clear, reach again. He had been at it since the light went gray. His shoulders burned in the way that asked everything of the body and left the mind nowhere to wander, and a mind that wandered backward. The sky had gone the color of cold iron, and the air carried that flat metal smell that meant snow within the hour. He wanted one more cord stacked before it broke. 11 days now since he had spoken aloud to anyone, and he had counted it without meaning to, the way a man counts steps on a march he cannot stop. The axe was rising for the next swing when the sound reached him. Not the wind, not the creak of pine, a boot on snow, set down with care at the edge of the trees. His body moved before his thoughts did. He turned, weight dropping low, the axe coming round, the grip already wrong for splitting and right for something else. 2 years gone from the border, and the body still kept its own counsel. The hand remembered what the man worked every day to forget. 30 paces off, where the timber ended, an orc woman stood in the snow. She was small. That landed wrong against everything the old stories promised. Barely past 5 feet, slight inside a ragged cloak, snow gathering on her hood. Her hands were held out from her sides, fingers spread, well clear of the long knife and the hatchet at her belt. She held them there on purpose. She knew how a man like him read a shape at a tree line, and answered it before he could ask. Neither of them moved. The first flakes came down between them, slow, taking their time. Her eyes found his and stayed, amber, steady, taking his measure as plainly as he took hers. Then she spoke, her voice rough with cold. "I'm not here to take anything. My arm's gone bad and the pass is closing. I can pay for one night by your fire. Work a coin, your choice. If the answer's no, point me to the next shelter and I'll go." Wade did not lower the axe. He looked at her open hands, at the way she cradled the right arm against her ribs, the hold of a person guarding a thing that hurts. "Pass is already closed," he said. The words came out like bark scraped off a log. "Next shelter's half a day off. You won't make it in this." The snow fell harder. Up the ridge the wind found its first real voice. He stood there longer than made sense, then lowered the axe and stepped back toward the door. "Fire's inside. Come on, then, before we both freeze arguing about it." She crossed the open ground, slow and even, hands loose at her sides, and that told him more than any word. Inside, the storm broke for true. It came off the pass in a long howl that rattled the shutters and threw snow flat against the window. Wade fed the hearth until it caught and roared. In the firelight he saw her plain, the chapped skin across her cheekbones, the braid worked through with carved bone, the 2 small tusks, the tiredness she would not name, and the arm. She peeled back the sleeve, and he saw the wound, days old, the edges gone red, the heat coming off it when she turned it to the light. "Been cleaning it on the trail," she said. "Ran out of what I had 2 days back." He pulled down the tin he kept for himself. He had dressed wounds before, too many, the kind men took when distant men decided it was worth their while. He boiled water and laid out the strips, the needle, the pouch of dried yarrow, gone bitter with age. She watched his hands, and something in her shoulders eased. She knew the work. "You've done this," she said, not a question. "Other side of it, mostly," he said. "Same wounds, though." So they did it together, 4 hands and few words. She held the arm to the light and named what she needed. He passed it across. He cleaned the wound, and she did not flinch, only breathed slow through her teeth. Once his thumb pressed too near the worst, and she went still as stone. He eased off, and neither said a thing. The storm leaned on the walls, and the walls held. When it was bound, she sat back and let out a long breath. He looked at the narrow bed against the far wall, the only one, and at the single chair by the door, and nodded at the bed. "Take it." "I'll take the floor. It's your—" "Take the bed." He carried the chair to the door and set it facing out, the way he set it every night, and sat. She watched him do it. She saw what it was. A man putting himself between the room and whatever came through the door, sleeping sitting up so he would not be caught lying down. She said nothing, only lay with her back to the wall and her face to the room, and he understood that too. The lamp burned low. The blizzard howled on through the dark. He listened to her breathing go slow and even across the room, and he knew, the way one of them would always seem to know the other, that she was no more asleep than he was. Morning came gray and wrong. He woke in the chair with his neck stiff and his hand already at his belt, and for a breath he did not know the room. Then he did. The fire had burned to coals, and the light through the window came thin and strange. When he stood, he understood why. Snow had climbed the glass to the second pane in the night, packed against the cabin in a drift that killed the wind to a low moan. The storm had not passed. It had only dug in. He looked across the room out of habit before he remembered there was anyone to look at. She lay where she had bedded down, back to the wall, face to the room. But her eyes were open and on him, and had been for a while. She had heard him wake. She had measured the stiffness in his neck and the hand at his belt, and filed it all away without a word, the way he would have done. Neither of them said good morning. There did not seem to be a word for what the morning was. He built the fire up and set water to boil, because the work gave his hands something honest to do. She rose and folded the blanket into a square with corners, the way a person folds a thing after years of being told to, and set it at the foot of the bed. He noticed. He said nothing. She crossed to the window and looked at the buried glass, and did the same sum he had done. "That's not a day of snow," she said. "That's a week trapped, maybe more." He poured the water over the dried leaves. "Maybe more," he agreed. So there it was, laid plain between them. She was here until the mountain decided otherwise, in one room with a stranger who slept facing the door. He handed her a tin cup, and she took it and wrapped both hands around it for the heat, and for a while they drank and said nothing, and the saying nothing was its own kind of talk. He watched her the way he could not help watching anything that moved in his space. She drank with her back to the wall, and her eyes on the door, even here. When a log cracked in the fire, her free hand dropped half an inch toward her belt, before it caught itself and stilled. He knew that half inch. He had spent 2 years living in it. His own hand had done the exact same thing not an hour before, and watching hers do it now was like seeing his own reflection move when he had not. "You served," he said. It came out flat, not a question. She held his eyes over the rim of the cup. "Long enough to learn to sit like this," she said. "You too. I saw it before you opened your mouth out there in the snow." Neither of them named where. Neither of them needed to. "Shira," she said after a moment, as if deciding the name was a fair thing to trade. "Wade," he said. That was the whole of it. No clan, no company, no questions about either. 2 names set down on the table like coins, and both of them understanding that names were all the other was owed for now. She finished the cup and stood and looked around the room with the eyes of someone taking an inventory. "I don't take charity," she said. "I said work or coin, and I meant it. Point me at something." He could have told her to sit. He could have done it all himself the way he did every day. But a man who has spent 11 days hearing only his own breath does not turn down a second pair of hands. And a person like her would not have rested under a roof she had not paid for. So he pointed. "Woodshed's running low, and the storm will burn it down to nothing. There's an axe by the door." She looked at the axe, then at her bound forearm, then at him, and something wry crossed her face. "I'll stack. You split." And that was the shape of it, settled without a meeting or a handshake. He split and she stacked. The two of them working the woodshed in the half-dark while the snow walled them in. She stood a head and more shorter than him, slight enough that he could have spanned her shoulders with two hands. Yet she moved the split rounds 2 and 3 at a time without slowing, setting them in courses tighter than he laid them himself. He was beginning to notice that noticing her had become a thing he did. They did not talk. The axe fell, the wood split, her hands stacked, and the rhythm of it filled the space where words would have gone and asked nothing of either of them. By the time the light failed, they had the shed half full again. He boiled the last of the meat into a thin stew, and they ate from the 2 bowls he owned, each sitting where they could see the door, and the absurdity of two people guarding one door from each other almost made him say something. He didn't. Then the cabin groaned. A long, low shudder ran through the roof beams, the sound of a great weight shifting overhead. And both of them were on their feet in the same instant, both hands at their belts, both bodies turned low toward the threat, mirror to mirror across the room. For one frozen breath they stood like that, two strangers caught in the exact same flinch, each looking at the other and seeing, plain as the fire between them, precisely what the other was. The groan came again, softer and settled. It was only the roof, the weight of the snow finding its place on the beams, the cabin shifting the way it always shifted under a heavy fall. Wade knew it the moment his blood stopped roaring. His hand came off his belt. Across the room, hers came off hers in the same breath, and they stood there in the firelight, both of them feeling foolish in the exact same way, neither willing to be the first to say it. She sat back down. He sat back down. After a while, she said, dry, "Old habits keep a body alive." He said, "They keep a body up all night, too." It was nearly a joke, and from either of them that was nearly a miracle. The days closed over them after that, white and long and without edges. The storm would ease and then come back, ease and come back, and the snow rose past the window, and the world shrank to one room and a woodshed, and the path he dug each morning to the buried creek. He had spent years learning to bear his own silence. He had not known until now that a silence with another person in it was a different thing. Not the empty hush he had chosen, but something with weight to it. They did not fill it with talk. They did not need to. They learned each other instead in the small things. She learned that he set his chair at the door each night and slept sitting up, his face to the threshold, and she never once asked him why. He learned that she ate with her back to the wall and woke at sounds he could not hear, and checked the window before she checked the fire. They moved around each other in the cramped room without colliding, two people who had each spent years reading exits and angles, and somewhere in the third day he realized they had stopped being strangers and become something he had no word for. Not friends, not yet, but no longer two animals circling a kill. It was the gear that told him the rest. On the second evening she had hung her cloak to dry by the fire, and he saw the shoulder of it plain, where her clan's mark was worked into the leather, and saw below it the place where a second mark had been, cut away, scraped down to bare hide and smoothed over, deliberate, the way a man files a number off a tag so no one can ask him what he did under it. His hand went without thinking to the iron token at his own throat, to the border company tag with its unit number ground blank years ago by his own thumb. He had erased the thing he had served. So had she. He said nothing about it. There was nothing to say that the matched scars on their gear had not already said. On the third day, Maba came. He heard her before he saw her, the old trapper woman cursing the snow in two tongues, breaking a path up from her cabin half a day below with a staff and a will harder than the cold. She came after every bad storm to see whether the young veteran had frozen in his sleep, and he had long since stopped pretending he didn't wait for it. She filled the doorway in her layered furs, gray-white braid pinned with bone, silver eyes sharp as a hawk's, and those eyes went straight to Shira, narrowed, and read her head to foot in one breath. "Pine River," she said, not a question. "That's a Pine River mark on your shoulder, girl, or what's left of one." Shira had risen and set her hands open and away from her belt, the old, careful posture. "It was," she said. Maba grunted and stamped the snow off her boots and came in like she owned the place, which on this mountain she half did. She knew the clans the way she knew the trap lines, 40 winters of trading meat and pelts and few words with everyone who passed. "I knew a healer of that clan years back," she said, turning Shira's bound arm to the light without asking, clicking her tongue at the work. "Good people. Hard people.
They don't send their healers wandering alone in winter for nothing." She looked at Shira a long moment, and something passed between the two orcs that Wade could not read. Some older understanding. Then Maba let the arm go. "She's no thief and no spy, boy," she said to him. "Whatever else she is, I'd stake my traps on it." She would not stay. She never stayed. She took the strip of dried meat he pressed on her and shouldered her staff, and at the door she stopped and looked back at the two of them, the tall, silent man and the small, silent woman, each at their wary distance in the firelit room. She had buried 2 husbands and outlived most of what she'd loved, and there was nothing on the mountain her eyes missed. She jerked her chin at Shira and spoke low, for Wade alone. "That one carries what you carry. I can see it from here, same as I can see the smoke off your chimney." She pulled her hood up against the white. "Might be the 2 of you can put some of it down." Then she was gone into the snow, and the path closed behind her, and Wade stood in the open doorway, with the cold pouring in, and her words sitting in his chest like a stone he did not know how to set down. The truth came out the way blood comes from a deep cut, slow, and never all at once. It came in fragments across the buried days, dropped between chores and left to lie where it fell. He did not ask, and she did not offer. The pieces simply surfaced, the way they do between 2 people who have stopped needing to perform for each other. One evening, mending a snare by the fire, she said without looking up that she had been a scout once, and a healer, and that the 2 trades did not sit well together. The one trained to find men, the other to mend them. He said he understood that better than he wished to. She nodded at the fire and said nothing more, and the snare cord whispered through her fingers in the quiet. Another night it was his turn. He was oiling the hunting knife, the old motion his hands made when his head needed somewhere to be, and he heard himself say that he had served on the border 2 years and walked off it one gray morning and never looked back. "Walked off," she repeated. Not a judgment, a recognition. Men don't walk off a thing they were proud of. He set the knife down. "No," he said. "They don't." The fire ate a log down to nothing while he found the rest of it. "Orders came from men 100 miles back who never smelled the smoke. Cost was paid up front, in the only coin those decisions ever spent. I stopped being able to tell myself it was for anything." He had never said it aloud. It came out flat and worn, like a stone carried so long in the pocket it has gone smooth. She was quiet a moment. Then she told him her half, in that same low, even voice, turning her bound forearm slow in the firelight. She had carried a blade for her clan's war band on that same border. She had done it because her people told her it was duty, and bled for it, and watched the young ones bleed for it, and then watched the elders trade the ground they bled for like beads at a market the moment the price was right. "Lives spent for gain," she said, "by men who never spent their own." She looked up at him then, and the amber of her eyes had gone hard with an old grief. "I could not keep being the knife in that hand. So I put the knife down and walked, same as you." It hung there between them, the shape of it, and neither needed it spelled out. 2 years ago. The same stretch of border. The same pointless, profitable killing dressed up as something worth a name. She on the green side of the line, he on the other. Both of them young and blooded and lied to in the same breath by men who slept easy 100 miles from the screaming. They would never prove they had stood across the same field. They might have. It did not matter. And that was the strange thing he turned over in the silence afterward. It did not divide them at all. If they had once tried to kill each other, they had been aimed by the same hand, and they had each, in the end, refused to be the weapon any longer. "We might have been there," she said quietly, saying the thing he would not. "Same fight. Opposite sides." He met her eyes across the small room. "Might have," he said. "Does it change anything?" She considered it with the seriousness she gave everything. "No," she said at last. "You're not the men who gave the orders. Neither am I. We're the two who put it down." And there it was, the only absolution either of them was ever going to get. And it came not from a priest or a judge, but from the one person alive who carried the wound out of the exact same machine. He had come to this mountain so the silence would have no one in it but himself and his ghosts. He had told himself the emptiness was healing him. It had not been. It had only kept the wound clean and open, year on year, the way cold keeps meat from turning without ever making it whole. He understood that now, sitting across a dying fire from a woman who flinched at the same sounds and slept braced against the same dark. The quiet in the cabin had changed under him without his noticing. It was no longer the hollow thing he had chosen. There was someone in it who did not make it worse, who, by carrying the same load, somehow made his own weigh less. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The fire settled. The storm breathed against the walls. He watched her bank the coals with the careful economy of a person who had learned the worth of warmth the hard way. And she caught him watching, and for once neither of them looked away. There was nothing to say. For the first time in longer than he could mark, the silence between him and another living soul was not loneliness wearing quiet's coat. It was company, and it frightened him more than any sound from the dark ever had. Because a man can guard against an enemy at the door, but he had no defense at all against this. He came awake with the knife already in his hand. There was no edge between the sleep and the waking, no soft moment to land in. One breath he was nowhere, the next he was bolt upright in the chair with his heart slamming his ribs and his fist white around the hilt. The dark of the cabin was not the dark of the cabin. It was the other dark, the one he carried, full of shapes that moved and sounds that weren't sounds, smoke he could smell and men he could hear, and the wet weight of a thing he had done or a thing done near him, he could never afterward say which. His breath came in tearing gulps. Somewhere a great cold wind was screaming, and his body did not know it was only the storm. His body knew only that he had to find the threat before it found him. He did not hear her move, because she did not move. From across the room came a voice, low and level, pitched to carry and not to startle. "Wade." Just his name first, set down soft, the way you set a hand on a spooked animal's flank before you touch it. He swung toward it, knife up, seeing nothing he could trust. The voice did not flinch. It did not hurry. "You're in the cabin," she said. "Your cabin, on the mountain. The one you built against the rock wall. The storm came in 9 days back, and it hasn't let up. It's the dead middle of the night, And that sound is the wind off the pass, nothing else. The creek's frozen behind the woodshed. There's a fire 2 steps from your boot, banked low. Each thing she named was a stone laid in the dark, a thing to stand on. You're here, she said. It's now. There's nothing in this room that means you harm. He held on to her words because they were the only solid thing. The cabin, the rock wall, the frozen creek. He dragged one breath in slow and let it out slower, the way she said it without saying it, and the screaming dark began, by degrees, to be only a storm again. The shapes thinned. The smoke faded to the honest smell of wood smoke and cold. His heart still hammered, but he could feel the chair beneath him now, the floor under his boots, the iron token cold at his throat. His hand opened. The knife came to rest on his knee, then on the floor, and he left it there. For a long moment the only sound was his own ragged breathing leveling out, and the wind worrying at the eaves. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his head down, and the shame came in behind the fear, the way it always did. He had been a soldier. He was supposed to be past this. 2 years out, he said at last, his voice cracked and low. And it's still... He could not finish it. He did not have to. Mine too, she said. She had not lit a lamp. She had not crossed to him. She had only stayed where she was, giving him the room a person needs, and the dark between them was not empty now. It doesn't leave. I used to think it would, if I was good enough, if I waited long enough out where it was quiet. A pause, and when she spoke again her voice had something worn smooth in it. It doesn't leave. You just stop having to face it alone in the dark. He lifted his head. He could just make out the shape of her against the far wall, sitting as she always sat, awake as she was always awake, because she slept no deeper than he did and never had. She had done this before, he understood. Not for him, for herself. 100 nights, alone, talking herself back from the country behind her own eyes, with no other voice to do it for her. That she had a voice to offer him now, and chose to, was the kind of thing a person does not say thank you for, because thank you is too small a word for it. So he said nothing. He only nodded into the dark, and across the room she nodded back, and it was, for the two of them, the most either had spoken to another living soul in longer than either could count. Let me ask you something, while it's quiet and the fire's low like it is in that cabin. Is there a dark you've been sitting up in alone, some weight you carry that you've told yourself you only have to carry by yourself because no one else could understand it? I think most of us have a chair we sleep in facing the door in one way or another. If any part of this is landing somewhere real in you tonight, stay with me a while longer. Follow this story. Leave a like so it finds the others who are sitting up in the same dark, and let's see these two through to morning together. Because that's the whole of it in the end. Nobody puts the weight down all at once. You just stop having to hold it alone. He woke to silence. Not the thick silence of a storm holding its breath between gusts. True silence. The kind the mountain made when it had put winter properly to bed. He sat in the chair by the door and listened to it for a long moment before he moved. The fire had burned low, and the cold had come in at the edges of the room, and the gray light at the window was different from the gray of the past 9 days. Flat. Still. He stood, opened the door, and the world had gone white. The snow had topped the woodshed eaves. It had buried the stump he split on and erased the path to the creek and filled the air with a silence so complete
He could hear his own breath as a separate thing. The sky overhead was clear and pale, and so cold it rang. The pines stood loaded and still, and high above, where the ridge gave way to bare rock and the pass broke through, there was nothing, no gap, no gray corridor of trail between the peaks, only an unbroken field of white that the first hard freeze had already sealed.
She came to stand beside him in the doorway, and he felt her take in the same thing he had already taken in, and neither of them said a word about it. There was nothing to say. The pass was gone until spring, and they both knew it, and naming it would only make it smaller than it was. She would be here until the thaw. Months. She turned back into the cabin, and he went to dig the path to the creek, and they moved through the white morning as if it had always been this way. It settled into them, the rhythm, over the days that followed. Morning, fire, water, whatever was left to eat. Midday, the work the season demanded, which was always enough to fill the hours and then some. He hunted a slope below the cabin, and she ran the trap line he had laid in the autumn, the two of them trading routes the way they traded everything, by reading what the other left behind. She mended the traps he had let go soft through neglect, reset 3 he had placed badly, and said nothing about either. He split the wood with the old, steady rhythm, and she stacked it in courses tight enough to shed water, same as she always did. In the evenings they ate by the fire, and one or the other of them talked, or neither of them did, and it came to the same thing, a quiet that had weight and warmth in it, the kind 2 people make between them without trying. He noticed the changes in the cabin the way a man notices a slow leak, not all at once, but in accumulation. Her braid beads strung on a nail by the window, a second cup always on the shelf, filled when he filled his own without his deciding to. The healer's herbs she had gathered and dried, now hanging from the rafter beside his own, different smells layered into the smoky air of the room. The blanket on the bed folded tighter than his hand ever managed. The chair he now slept in shifted an inch from where he placed it each night. She moved it back from the door a fraction every morning, and he let it stay. He had built this room for one. It no longer felt like one. He started on the woodshed wall in the second week of the stillness. He did not say anything about it. He found the spare planking he had cut the previous spring and stacked behind the shed under oilcloth, and he pulled it out and looked at it one morning while she was on the trap line. And then he found the hammer. The north half of the woodshed was given over to split rounds. The south half had always been unused, a gap he had never filled because there was only him to fill things for. He began to frame it out. A room barely a bed frame's width across, a shelf, a peg for a cloak, a south-facing cut for a window no larger than 2 hands side by side. He worked fast and without ceremony, the way he did anything he did not want to think too hard about. She came back from the trap line with 2 hairs over her shoulder and stopped at the corner of the shed and looked at what he was doing. He kept hammering. She stood there long enough that he knew she had taken it all in, the framing, the window cut, the proportions of a room sized for one small person. He did not look up. He heard her shift the hairs to her other shoulder and step past him into the cabin, and the door closed behind her, and he went on swinging the hammer in the cold, and neither of them said a word. And in the saying nothing was everything that needed saying. Later, when he came in, there were 2 bowls on the shelf and the hairs on the spit, and she was sitting with her back to the wall and her face to the fire, and she looked up at him, and something in her expression was different in a way he could not name. He sat, and they ate, and the fire talked for them, and it was not until he lay down in the chair that night, one hand loose at his side, that he understood what he had seen in her face. She had not expected it. She had not, until today, let herself expect anything from anyone. And now she was going to have to learn what to do with that. The figure broke from the tree line at mid-morning. Wade was on the woodshed roof, fitting the last of the shingles over the new room, when the movement caught at the edge of his eye, and his body did what it always did. He was down off the ladder with his hand at his belt before his mind had named the shape. Old reflexes do not ask permission, but the shape down of the trees was small and quick, and throwing both hands wide, palms out, the same surrender Shira had thrown on her first morning. And before Wade could decide anything, Shira herself was already moving past him into the open yard, and her voice cut the cold air in a tongue he did not know. The figure answered in the same tongue, ragged with relief, and started forward through the snow at a stumbling run. He was young, barely more than a boy under the road-stained clothes, lean and quick the way a hard rider is lean, his skin a brighter green than Shira's, his black braids strung with beads, gone dull from weather. He had a short bow across his back, and a long knife at his belt, and a fresh scar split across one knuckle, and he had clearly not slept warm in days. He stopped a few paces off and looked from Shira to the tall, silent human and back, and something wary crossed his young face, the look of a clan rider who has found his kinswoman living in a stranger's cabin a long way from anywhere safe. Shira said something low, and the wariness eased, not all the way. "Cor," she said to Wade, switching to common. "My cousin, Pine River. He's been tracking me." She looked at the boy a long moment. "Since before the snow, by the look of him." "I lost your trail at the old woman's cabin," Cor said, his common rougher than Shira's, the words bitten short by cold. "Then the storm came down, and I couldn't move for 9 days. She fed me. She said you'd come up here." He glanced at Wade, plainly turning over what a Pine River healer was doing under a human veteran's roof, and plainly deciding it was not the moment. "I'd near given you up for dead." They brought him inside, and that was the strange thing Wade noticed even through the wariness. How the cabin took a third body without protest. How the room he had built for one, and quietly remade for two, now held 3, and felt not crowded, but filled. Cor ate like a man who had been rationing for a week, and only when the worst of it was off him did he set the bowl down and tell them why he had come. "The holding still needs you," he said to Shira. "The old healer passed in the autumn, and there's no one. That's why they sent me after you when you didn't reach the pass." He turned the empty bowl in his hands. "But that's not the half of it now. That's not why I half killed a horse getting here." He looked up, and the youth went out of his face and left something older in it. "There's a band working the low holdings, deserters, border company men who broke and ran and turned to this instead. 8, maybe 10. They've been hitting the scattered cabins all down the early winter, the trappers, the herders, anyone caught alone with a full larder. They don't leave folk behind to talk about it." He said it flat, the way a person says a thing he has already seen the end of. "They take what they need, and they burn the rest, and they move on up. And they're moving up." The fire popped. Wade felt the old cold settle into him, the one that had nothing to do with the weather. He knew the kind of men Cor meant. He had served beside men a half-step from becoming them, men the border had hollowed out and then turned loose, men for whom the killing had stopped meaning anything long before the leaving. He had walked off the line precisely so he would never again stand in a field full of them. And now here was a boy at his fire, telling him they were climbing his mountain. "How far up?" Wade asked. His voice came out level. It always did, at the worst times. That was its own kind of scar. Cor looked at him for the first time as something other than a stranger sheltering his cousin. "I came up the ridge ahead of them," he said. 2 days, maybe 3, the way they move. Slow, taking each place as they reach it. There's only the one trail up this side once the pass closes. He did not have to draw the map. Wade already saw it, the line of it laid out cold and plain in his head, the way he had once been trained to see ground. One trail up the ridge, cabin after cabin strung along it like beads, each one a larder and a kill. And the first of them, the only one between the low holdings and his own door, half a day down the slope, smoke rising from its chimney, as it had for 40 winters. The old woman who had fed this boy and vouched for Shira and told him heavy things got lighter, shared. Maba's cabin stood directly in their path, and after hers, at the top of the trail where it ended against the rock wall, stood his. They went down at first light. There had been no argument worth the name. Wade had laid it out flat the night before. They could not leave the old woman alone at the bottom of the trail with that coming up it, and the only sense was to go down, bring her up, and hold the high ground where the cabin sat against the rock wall. Shira had agreed before he finished. Cor had only checked the string of his bow and nodded. So they roped themselves against the drifts and went down in the gray before dawn, 3 dark shapes on the snow, and Wade felt the old machinery turn over in him, the reading of ground, the spacing, the silence. He had sworn never to feel it again. It came back like it had never left. They smelled the smoke before they saw the cabin, black and greasy, a roof catching, and too soon the men moving faster than Cor had judged or a hard party sent ahead. Wade broke the rope and ran. The trail dropped through a stand of pine and opened onto Maba's clearing, and he saw it. Her cabin with one wall alight, the door staved in. 4 men in mismatched border leather hauling sacks of her winter stores into the snow, while one swung a torch toward the woodpile. He did not remember deciding. He was simply among them, and the knife was in his hand, and the years he had tried to bury rose up and did the work he had spent so long hating them for. It was fast and ugly and close. A man turned with a blade, and Wade took him down into the snow and did not let him rise. Shira came in low and silent, and put another off his feet before he knew she was there. Cor's bow sang from the tree line, and a third deserter went down clutching his thigh. The torchman dropped his brand and shouted, and what had looked like easy work, an old woman alone, a full larder, turned into something with teeth, and the deserters did the arithmetic hard men always do, and broke. They grabbed what they could and ran for the lower trail, dragging their wounded, and Wade let them go because chasing men into trees you do not own is how you die. Then he was through the broken door. The cabin was full of smoke, and the near wall was burning, and Maba was down on the floor by her overturned table, a gash above her temple painting half her face red, her arm bent wrong beneath her. But her silver eyes were open and furious. "Took your time," she rasped, and tried to get up, and could not. Shira was already there, hands moving over the old woman with a swift certainty Wade had seen turned on her own arm that first night. "Get her up," Shira said. "Get the stores that didn't burn. This place is gone." Then Cor carried the old trapper woman up the ridge on his back, while Wade and Shira hauled a sledge of rescued goods behind, and Maba's cabin of 40 winters burned down to black timbers in the snow behind them. She came round by the time they laid her on the bed. Shira worked the head wound and set the arm, with Cor holding her still and Maba cursing them both in language that made even the boy's ears go dark. Wade stood at the door he had slept facing for 2 years and watched the woman who had vouched for a stranger, who had told him heavy things got lighter shared, lie hurt under his own roof, because men he had once worn the same colors as had come up his mountain to take what was hers. Something in him that had been numb a long time woke all the way up. He had come to this place to be done with it. He had built one room far from every living soul, so he would never again stand in a line of men spending other men for someone else's gain. He had told himself that walking away was the only clean thing left to do. But this was not that. This was not a flag he did not believe in, or an order from 100 miles back, or ground bought and sold. This was the old woman bleeding on his bed, and the boy who had near killed a horse to warn them, and the woman beside him who had talked him out of the dark and asked nothing for it, and a band of broken men who would now, having tasted that there was a stalked and stubborn cabin at the top of the trail, come to finish what they had started. They would come. He knew the breed. Driven off once and shown there was something worth taking, they would not slink away. They would come for the larder, for the killing, and to settle the score of the men left bleeding in the snow. Wade looked at the rock wall behind his cabin, the one trail up, the cleared ground he had spent 2 years keeping clear. He was no longer reading it as a man who wanted to be left alone. He was reading it as ground. "They'll come," he said. Shira tied off the last of Maba's bandage and stood and met his eyes, and there was no fear in hers, only the same cold clarity. "Yes," she said. "Then we make them sorry they climbed," he said. And for the first time in 2 years, the old machinery turning over in him did not feel like a sickness. It felt like a choice. This was a fight worth being in, and he chose it with his eyes open. They had 2 days to make the ground their own, and they did not waste an hour of it. Wade had walked the approach 1,000 times without once seeing it the way he saw it now. The trail came up through pine and broke into the cleared yard with the cabin against the rock wall, and there was only the one way in. So they closed the rest. He and Kor felled timber across the flanking slopes where a man might circle, dropped the trunks into a tangle no one would cross quietly, and left the single throat of the trail open on purpose, narrow, churned to ice, every step of it covered from the cabin and the woodshed roof. Shira moved through it with the eye of a scout, marking the angles, the dead ground, the place a man would break and run. Inside, Maba sat propped against the wall, bandaged arm in a sling, and a row of weapons across her knees, sharpening what could be sharpened, and saying it was the best entertainment she'd had in 40 winters. They came at dawn on the second day. 8 of them climbed out of the pines into the gray light, and Wade read them in a glance from the window. Hard, lean, ugly with the confidence of men who had taken a dozen cabins and met nothing they could not break. They expected frightened trappers. They came up loose and loud, already arguing over the stores, and they did not see the felled timber for what it was, or the iced trail for the killing ground it was, until Kor's first arrow took the lead man off his feet. After that it was fast and close. The deserters tried to spread, and found the flanks choked with timber, funneled back into the narrow trail where Kor's bow worked them from above, and they could not climb to reach him. 2 pushed through into the yard, and Wade met them with Shira at his back, and the thing he had buried for 2 years rose up clean this time, without the sickness behind it. They fought back to back in the trampled snow, the tall man and the small woman, each guarding the ground the other could not see. moving the way two people move who have spent weeks learning each other in one room. A blade came at Wade low, and he turned it, and a second man drove past his guard, and pain opened hot across his ribs. But he stayed on his feet and put the man down. From the doorway, Maba's good arm sent a fresh blade skidding to Shira's hand the moment her own broke. Kor's arrows kept falling. The winter itself fought for them. The cold that slowed the raiders' hands, the ice that stole their footing, the deep snow that swallowed every man who left the trail. It broke the way these things break, all at once. The deserters understood, the way hard men understand, that they had climbed into a trap dressed as a prize, that the trappers were soldiers, the ground was against them, and this cabin would cost more than all of them were worth. The will went out of them between one breath and the next. The three, still standing, ran for the lower trail, and Wade let them go, and they vanished into a winter that gave no quarter and would, in all likelihood, finish what the morning had started. The yard went quiet. Only the wind was left, and the steam of breath, and the snow going red in patches the next fall would cover. Wade put his hand to his side, and it came away wet. The cut ran along the ribs, long and shallow and burning, and he sat down in the snow more heavily than he meant to. Shira was there before he had finished sitting. She knelt and peeled back the torn leather and looked, and the breath she let out was relief dressed as a curse. "Shallow," she said. "You'll keep." She pressed a pad of cloth hard against it, and his vision whited and steadied. Then she worked over him with the same hands he had felt that first night, the same steady certainty, the same wordless care. The hands that had reached across a dark room and named the cabin and the storm until the country behind his eyes let him go. He watched her bind him and understood that he was trusting his blood to the woman he might once have faced across a field, and no part of him flinched from it. That was the thing he carried out of the morning, more than the wound. He had killed again, and he searched himself for the old, sick hollowness, the rot the border left in him every time, the feeling of being a tool in a hand that did not care whose blood it spent. It was not there. He had fought for the old woman cursing cheerfully in the doorway, for the boy on the roof, for the woman tying off the bandage at his side, for the one place in the world he had let himself begin to want. There was a reason in it that he had chosen himself, and it left no rot behind. Shira finished the knot and looked up and found him watching her, and neither of them looked away, and in the cold, bright ruin of the morning, something passed between them that needed no naming and got none. And the long winter still lay all around them, and they would have all of it now to learn what to do with what they had won. The deserters did not come again. Winter closed over the mountain and held it, and for the first time the quiet did not press on Wade like a hand. The cabin built for one carried four through the dark months without strain. Maba healed slow by the hearth, her arm knitting crooked and strong, filling the evenings with mountain talk and a low, approving look whenever his eyes found Shira. Kor learned to split wood the way Wade did, and to sit a silence the way Shira sat one. Without any of them choosing the word, they were a household. Wade healed too, and not only the cut along his ribs. The nightmares did not stop. Shira had told him true, they do not leave. But he no longer faced them alone, and a thing faced with another in the room is a smaller thing. By deep winter he slept lying down. The chair stayed by the door, but he no longer needed it. The thaw came at the turn of the season, and with it, the pass. Kor went down as soon as the trail would bear a rider, carrying word to the Pine River holding that the raiders were dealt with. He came back 12 days later with 2 pack horses, smoked meat, and an offer he laid out at the fire with the formality of a rider trusted with something larger than himself.
The Holdings still wanted a healer, he said, but the elders, hearing how a human veteran's cabin had broken a band the Lowland Holdings could not, had a different thought now. They wanted a bonded outpost here, on this side of the pass, where clan and frontier folk both could trade and shelter and find a healer through the hard winters. They asked Shira to head it, and asked, with a courtesy that barely hid the curiosity, whether the veteran would hold it with her. Wade did not answer in front of the boy. He went out onto the porch instead, the wide porch he had built when he raised the cabin and never understood why he made it broad enough for more than one, that had held a single chair for 2 years over nothing but his solitude. Shira came out after him. The morning was bright and cold, the high pass open at last as a thin gray line between the peaks. "I meant to be over that pass before the first snow," Shira said. The snow had other plans. The corner of her mouth moved. "So did you." Wade kept his eyes on the pass. "I came up here to be alone," he said. "How's that working out?" she said, dry as winter bark. He let it sit. He looked back at the second room he had built without ever admitting why, at the old woman dozing by his fire, at the clan boy stacking wood in courses too tight, at the woman beside him, who carried the same ghosts and sat with him in the same silence and asked nothing he could not give. "Worked better than I deserved," he said, and turned to her. "Stay." Shira looked at him a long moment, amber eyes steady and warm. "I was always going to," she said. "I just wanted you to say it." This is where it stops being a thing that ends and becomes a thing that goes on. A bright, cold morning, winter turning to spring. Wade's cabin is not one room anymore, the second room built onto the woodshed, the porch that held one chair holding several now, the smoke rising straight into the still air. Wade is in the yard, splitting wood in the old rhythm. Set the log, swing, split, clear. And when a sound comes from the tree line, a boot on snow at the edge of the pines, his hand does not go to his belt. It does not even think to. He knows the sound now. It is Shira coming back from the traps with a brace of hair over her shoulder, Kor a few steps behind, and Maba's voice carrying from the cabin that the stew is ready and they are late. And on the porch rail, side by side on a leather thong Shira plaited through the winter, hang 2 carved bone tokens, his border tag with the number filed blank, and the clan mark she scraped from her own shoulder a lifetime ago. The 2 erased pasts. Neither threw them away, but they do not carry them hidden against the skin anymore, alone in the dark. They hang out here in the open, in the light, where the weight of them is shared. The man who built a cabin far from every living soul to be alone with his ghosts was found in the end by a woman who walked out of the pines carrying the same ones on the day the first snow fell. Let me leave you with one thing, now they're warm and fed and going to be all right. Wade was so sure the safest thing to do with his ghosts was carry them alone up a mountain where no one could ask. Maybe you've made that same quiet decision somewhere, that some weight is yours to bear by yourself, that letting anyone near it would only burden them. I won't pretend to know your mountain, but I gently ask whether the door you sit up to guard might have someone good on the other side of it. If this story reached you, stay with this channel, follow it, leave a like, so the next person sitting up alone in the dark finds it too. There are more fires to sit by, and none of us were ever meant to do it on our own. That's the whole of it. 10 parts, start to finish. If you'd like, I can pull the complete story together into a single file for you. Do a consistency pass across all 10 parts, or tweak the tone or pacing of any section.